5 million people, spread across more than 1,500 settlements, spanning an area larger than Mesopotamia and Egypt combined. They built cities with covered drains beneath every street, standardized their bricks to a single ratio across 1,000 kilometers, and traded carnelian and lapis lazuli from the mountains of Afghanistan to the ports of Mesopotamia. Yet they left behind no king's name, no palace, no triumphal monument, no conquest inscription. The Indus Valley Civilization achieved something that should not have been possible in the ancient world, and then, quietly, it vanished. This is the complete story. From the first farmers who settled the Kachi plain of Baluchistan around 7,000 years before Christ, planting barley and burying their dead with offerings of shell and turquoise, through the slow rise of pottery traditions and copper-working villages, through the emergence of fortified towns and the first scratches of an undeciphered script, to the explosive birth of true cities around 2600 before Christ. From the peak of urban life, its astonishing hydraulic engineering, its master craftspeople drilling carnelian beads with diamond-hard precision, its merchant ships crossing the Arabian Sea, to the moment the rivers shifted, the monsoons weakened, and the great cities fell silent one by one. And beyond, into the long dispersal, the echoes that survive in later South Asian civilization, and the modern rediscovery that rewrote history. This story still matters because it challenges everything we assume about how complex societies must work. It asks whether cities require kings, whether order demands coercion, whether civilization itself might take forms we have barely imagined. If you find yourself drawn to complete journeys through the rise and silence of ancient worlds, subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Each week, we walk the full lifespan of a civilization that shaped history. Let us begin where it all started, in the dust of the Bolan Pass, where the mountains open onto the plain. The Kachi Plain opens like a hand at the mouth of the Bolan Pass, where the highlands of Baluchistan descend toward the Indus floodplain. Alluvial fans spread outward from the mountain gorges, carrying silt and snowmelt into a landscape of seasonal grasses and scattered acacia. To the west, the pass climbs through narrow defiles toward the Iranian plateau and Central Asia beyond. To the east, the land flattens into the vast riverine lowlands that will one day hold cities. But in the 7th millennium before the Common Era, no city exists anywhere on the subcontinent. No fired brick, no written sign, no metal tool. Only the slow turning of seasons across a landscape where small bands of hunters follow wild sheep and gazelle through the Piedmont, gathering wild barley from the hillsides. Beneath a low mound on the Kachi Plain, at a site that will not receive its modern name of Mehrgarh for another 9,000 years, the earliest layers of permanent human occupation lie sealed in compacted earth. Radiocarbon dates place the first structures here to approximately 7,000 years before the Common Era. These are not caves or temporary shelters. They are rectangular rooms built from hand-formed mud bricks, arranged in clusters of 4 to 6 compartments, some used for habitation and others for storage. The bricks are simple, sun-dried loam pressed into rough blocks, but their geometry is deliberate. Walls meet at right angles. Doorways open onto shared courtyards. This is architecture with intention. The people who build these rooms are among the first in South Asia to cross the threshold from mobile foraging to settled agriculture. In the storage compartments, carbonized seeds accumulate across generations. wild and cultivated barley, emmer wheat, einkorn. The grains grow larger over centuries as human selection favors plumper kernels and tougher rachises that hold seed to the stalk until harvest. Alongside the plant remains, animal bones tell a parallel story. Wild zebu cattle, hunted in the earliest phases, gradually show morphological changes consistent with managed herds, smaller horn cores, shifting age profiles that suggest selective slaughter of young males. Stone tools dominate the material record. Blades of fine-grained chert, struck from prepared cores, serve as sickle elements for grain harvesting. Bone awls and needles indicate leather and textile working. Ground stone querns and pestles appear in nearly every household unit, their surfaces worn smooth from processing grain into flour. The dead rest beneath the floors of the living. Burials from the aceramic phases reveal bodies placed in flexed positions, accompanied by offerings that speak of networks far wider than the Kachi plain itself. Baskets of grain sit beside the deceased. Necklaces of seashell, sourced from the Arabian Sea coast, over 400 kilometers distant, drape across skeletal remains. Beads of turquoise, likely originating from eastern Iran or southern Central Asia, appear among the grave goods. These are not isolated villages. Even in this earliest phase, exchange routes thread through the mountain passes. Perhaps most remarkably, several skulls from these early burials show evidence of dental modification, tiny holes drilled into living molars using flint-tipped bow drills, representing some of the oldest known evidence of proto-dentistry anywhere in the world. The precision of these perforations, some less than 3 millimeters in diameter, suggests practiced hands and specialized knowledge passed between generations. By the 6th millennium before the Common Era, the settlement expands. New construction phases layer over old. The rectangular compartmented buildings grow more numerous, their mud brick walls thicker and more carefully finished. Cotton seeds appear in the archaeological record, the earliest known evidence of cotton cultivation on Earth, predating its documented use anywhere else by centuries. The plant fibers will eventually clothe a civilization, but here at Mehrgarh they represent only the first tentative experiments in domesticating a crop that demands careful irrigation and warm growing seasons. No pottery exists in these earliest levels. Food is stored in bitumen-coated baskets and stone vessels. Cooking happens over open hearths. The absence of ceramics is not a mark of simplicity, but of a community that has not yet required them, a people whose technologies are perfectly calibrated to their needs. The pottery will come later, transforming storage, cooking, and eventually artistic expression across the entire region. But for now, in the deep silence of the 7th and 6th millennia, the mud brick rooms of Mehrgarh hold only seed and stone, bone and shell, and the quiet architecture of a world learning to stay in one place. Sometime around 5,500 years before the Common Era, fire transforms the earth itself. In the kilns rising beside the mud brick compounds of Mehrgarh's 4th period, wet clay, shaped by hand, enters the heat as formless matter and emerges as something permanent, a vessel that can hold water without seeping, store grain without rot, carry milk without the taint of hide or bark. The first pottery of the Kachi plain is simple in form, but revolutionary in implication. Thick-walled jars with rounded bases, their surfaces burnished to a dull sheen, begin appearing in storage rooms where bitumen-coated baskets once sufficed. Within generations, potters discover that a slip of fine clay applied before firing creates a smooth canvas, and onto this canvas they paint, first simple bands of dark pigment, then chevrons, cross-hatching, and eventually the sinuous forms of animals. Ibex with curving horns, fish rendered in quick parallel strokes, birds in flight. The Togau ceramic tradition emerges in the hills of northern Baluchistan during the 5th millennium before the Common Era, its vessels distinguished by friezes of humped bulls and geometric panels in black on red buff surfaces. At Kiligul Mohammed, near modern Quetta, excavations reveal a sequence moving from coarse handmade wares to increasingly refined painted pottery over centuries. Further south, the Kechi Beg style develops, elegant forms decorated with bold polychrome designs, their motifs suggesting a shared symbolic vocabulary spreading across the highland valleys. These are not merely functional objects. They carry meaning, mark identity, signal belonging to communities connected by trade and kinship across difficult terrain. Copper appears in this same transformation. Small hammered pins and awls of native copper had existed at Mehrgar since its earliest phases, but by the 5th millennium, evidence of true smelting emerges, the deliberate reduction of copper ore using charcoal fuel and forced draft furnaces. Crucible fragments bearing green copper residue, found in Mehrgar's 6th and 7th periods, indicate workshops where metalworkers mastered temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees. The resulting metal, cast into simple flat axes, chisels, and ornamental rings, supplements rather than replaces the stone tool tradition. Flint blades remain sharper for cutting. Copper offers malleability, durability, and prestige. The settlements multiply and spread. Farming communities that had clustered along the Bolan Pass corridor now push eastward onto the Indus alluvium and southward towards the coast. At Balakot, near the Makran shore, a fishing and farming village establishes itself by the mid-4th millennium, its inhabitants exploiting marine shell, particularly the heavy Turbinella pyrum, for bangles traded far inland. Along the now dry channels of the Gaga-Hakra river system, in what is today the Kholistan Desert of Pakistan and the Thar margin of India, Hakra ware pottery appears, a distinctive tradition of mud-applied decoration and incised patterns marking the easternmost expansion of these early agricultural communities. Early stamp seals carved from bone and soft stone begin appearing in Mehrgar's later periods, small geometric forms, buttons with simple cross or dot motifs pressed into clay to mark ownership or seal containers. They are modest objects, no larger than a thumbnail, but they represent something profound. The need to identify, to claim, to distinguish one person's goods from another's in communities growing too large for everyone to know everyone else. By 3,300 years before the Common Era, the landscape between Baluchistan and the Ganges-Yamuna divide holds hundreds of settlements, some still small farming hamlets, others growing into substantial villages of several hundred people with specialized quarters for potters, metalworkers, and bead makers. Long-distance exchange networks carry lapis lazuli from the mountains of Badakhshan, turquoise from northeastern Iran, marine shell from the Arabian Sea coast, and copper from Rajasthan. The painted pottery traditions have diversified into regional styles, yet a shared material vocabulary connects them. Similar vessel forms, comparable kiln technologies, overlapping decorative grammars. The infrastructure for something larger is assembling itself, piece by piece, across 2 millennia of quiet accumulation. The cities do not yet exist, but their foundations, technological, social, economic, are being laid in every kiln fire, every copper pour, every seal pressed into wet clay. By 3,300 years before the Common Era, the villages have outgrown themselves. Along the Middle Indus, where the river cuts through limestone ridges before spreading across the Sindh plain, settlements that once held a few hundred souls now shelter thousands, and for the first time they raise walls. At Kot Diji, on a narrow ridge overlooking the floodplain southeast of modern Mohenjo-daro, a massive fortification of limestone rubble and mud brick rises nearly 3 meters thick. Its base courses are rough-hewn stone, quarried from the ridge itself, while upper courses transition to sun-dried brick, laid in alternating headers and stretchers. Behind this wall, a citadel mound commands views across the agricultural hinterland. Below it, a lower town spreads outward in a pattern that anticipates the dual-division layout of later Harappan cities: elevated authority precinct above, residential and commercial quarters below. The population approaches several thousand. This is no longer a village. It is something new. 500 kilometers to the north, Rehmanderi in the Gomal Plain presents an even more startling development. Here, by approximately 3,200 before the Common Era, a settlement of some 22 hectares has been laid out with streets intersecting at right angles. The town plan is deliberate from its founding, not the organic accretion of centuries, but a single act of spatial imagination imposed upon the earth. Mud brick houses line lanes that run roughly north-south and east-west. A fortification wall encloses the entire settlement. Pottery from its earliest levels carries painted motifs of humped bulls, peepal leaves, and geometric patterns that will persist for 7 centuries. Further east, on the banks of the now-vanished Ghaggar-Hakra river system, Kalibangan emerges as another fortified center. Its pre-urban phase, designated Early Harappan, features a parallelogram-shaped citadel enclosed by a mud brick wall with bastions at regular intervals. Within, houses are built of mud brick in a standardized ratio, the same 1:2:4 proportional system of width to height to length that will later define the entire mature civilization. The standardization is already spreading, an invisible consensus forming across hundreds of kilometers without any evidence of central command. On pottery sherds from these sites, something extraordinary appears. Short sequences of incised or painted marks, angular, linear, sometimes curving, cluster near vessel rims and shoulders. These are the earliest known instances of the Indus script, scratched into wet clay before firing. At Kot Diji, at Harappa's earliest levels known as Period 1, at Rehmanderi, these proto-signs appear. They are brief, rarely more than 2 or 3 marks, but they represent a threshold crossed. Information is being encoded in a system shared across communities separated by vast distances. Weights appear simultaneously. Small cubes of chert, precisely ground, following a binary decimal progression. The smallest unit weighs approximately 0.85 grams. Multiples proceed by doubling 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, then shift to a decimal system at higher values. The uniformity is remarkable. A weight from Harappa matches one from Kalibangan matches one from sites in Gujarat. Trade requires trust, and trust requires measurement. Then, around 2600 before the Common Era, Kot Diji burns. A thick destruction layer of ash, charred timber, and collapsed mud brick separates the early Harappan occupation from what follows. The fire is intense and comprehensive. Whether this represents conquest, internal upheaval, or accidental conflagration remains debated. But above the burn layer, a new material culture appears, the fully standardized assemblage of the mature Harappan phase. Similar destruction or abandonment layers appear at Amri, at Gumla, at Nausharo. Across the Indus system, the regional diversity of the early Harappan period gives way to something unified. The many traditions converge. The 7 centuries between 3300 and 2600 before the Common Era are the crucible. Fortification walls suggest competition or threat. Standardized bricks and weights suggest cooperation and shared authority. The first drainage channels appear in streets at Kalibangan, carrying wastewater away from dwellings. The script begins its slow elaboration. And everywhere, the settlements grow denser, more ordered, more interconnected. The infrastructure assembled across millennia of quiet accumulation has reached critical mass. What emerges from the ashes of Kot Diji will be something unprecedented. Cities without kings, order without monuments to power, complexity without any legible declaration of who commands it. The transformation happens within a single century, across an area stretching more than 1,500 kilometers from the Arabian Sea coast to the upper reaches of the Gaga-Hakra system. Settlements that had been growing steadily for generations suddenly crystallize into something new. The fortified towns of the early Harappan period do not simply expand. They reorganize themselves according to principles so consistent, so precisely replicated across such vast distances, that the result defies easy explanation. Mohenjo-daro rises on a ridge of natural limestone beside the Indus in Lower Sindh, its foundations laid upon virgin soil sometime around 2,600 years before the Common Era. From the beginning, the city divides itself into 2 distinct zones. To the west, elevated on a massive mud brick platform standing nearly 12 meters above the surrounding floodplain, sits what excavators would later call the citadel, not a palace compound, but a precinct of public structures whose purposes remain debated. To the east and south spreads the lower town, a dense residential grid where streets run north-south and east-west with remarkable precision, intersecting at right angles, the main arteries measuring nearly 10 meters wide. 800 kilometers to the northeast, Harappa undergoes parallel transformation along the banks of the Ravi River in Punjab. Its mound AB, the oldest occupied area, expands dramatically. A massive perimeter wall of mud brick encloses the settlement. Immediately to the north, workers construct an enormous raised platform, the so-called granary, a structure measuring 50 by 40 meters, built upon rows of brick foundations separated by narrow ventilation channels. Whether it stored grain or served some other communal function, its scale announces collective organization operating far beyond the household level. The bricks themselves tell the deepest story. Fired in kilns at temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees, every brick across the civilization maintains the same proportional ratio: 1 unit thick, 2 units wide, 4 units long. A brick measuring 7 centimeters by 14 centimeters by 28 centimeters at Mohenjo-daro matches the proportional logic of bricks at Dholavira, over 700 kilometers to the south in the salt marshes of Kutch. This standardization implies not merely shared tradition, but active coordination. some mechanism ensuring that construction practices remain uniform across territories larger than modern France. D'Oliveira occupies the island of Kadir in the Rann of Kutch, its planners choosing a site between two seasonal streams. The city divides itself into three distinct walled enclosures, a citadel, a middle town, and a lower town, each fortified with walls of dressed stone reaching 5 meters thick. Rakhigarhi, in present-day Haryana, grows to cover perhaps 300 hectares, potentially the largest of all Harappan settlements. Ganweriwala sits along the now dry Gaga-Hakra channel in Cholistan, its unexcavated mounds stretching across 80 hectares. At Mohenjo-daro, the citadel mound holds the Great Bath, a rectangular tank measuring 12 meters long, 7 meters wide, and 2.5 meters deep, its floor sealed with a layer of natural bitumen to prevent seepage. Brick steps descend into the basin from both ends. Surrounding rooms with narrow doorways suggest controlled access, ritual purpose, purification. No throne room adjoins it. No royal inscription marks its walls. The populations of these cities reach between 30 and 50,000 inhabitants each. The total settled population across the civilization may approach 5 million. Yet nowhere does a single structure announce individual sovereignty. The largest buildings serve communal or ceremonial functions. The residential quarters show variation in house size. Some dwellings occupy single rooms, while others spread across dozens, suggesting economic stratification without the architectural vocabulary of kingship. No city contains a palace. No burial yet discovered holds the concentrated wealth of a pharaoh or a Sumerian king. What emerges instead is a civilization whose organizing principle remains invisible to archaeology trained on monuments and inscriptions. The order is real, written in brick ratios, in drainage gradients, in the geometry of streets, but its source cannot be located in any single building or any single body. The order that cannot be located in any single building reveals itself most clearly underground. Beneath the streets of Mohenjo-daro, beneath the lanes of Harappa, beneath the alleys of every excavated settlement from the Makran coast to the Gaga-Hakra basin, runs a network of covered brick channels, engineered with a precision that speaks of centralized planning, executed at a civic scale. By 2,400 years before the Common Era, this infrastructure has reached a sophistication unmatched anywhere in the contemporary world. The drains begin inside private houses. Nearly every dwelling excavated in the mature levels of Mohenjo-daro contains a dedicated bathing platform, a raised floor of tightly fitted bricks, sloped inward toward a corner outlet. Wastewater flows through a fired brick channel set into the wall, passes beneath the house's outer face, and empties into a covered lane drain. These lane drains, constructed of bricks laid on edge with flat capstones, run along every residential street at a carefully maintained gradient, a fall of roughly 2 centimeters per meter, sufficient to keep water moving without eroding the channel bed. At intersections, the drains feed into larger trunk channels. At intervals, brick-lined sump pits collect sediment, designed to be periodically cleaned by hand. The system is not improvised. It is engineered as a unified whole, the gradient calculated before the streets are laid. The implications are extraordinary. In Mesopotamia, in Egypt, in every other Bronze Age civilization, drainage serves palaces and temples. Here it serves every household. The smallest single-room dwelling connects to the system. The largest multi-room compound connects to the same system. Whatever hierarchy exists in house size does not translate into differential access to sanitation infrastructure. Water arrives through wells. At Mohenjo-daro alone, excavations have revealed more than 700 wells, cylindrical shafts lined with wedge-shaped bricks specially manufactured to form tight curves. Some wells stand inside private courtyards, others open onto public lanes, accessible to any resident. The density approaches one well for every 3 houses, a ratio suggesting that no individual must walk more than a few dozen meters to reach fresh water. The wells are sunk through the alluvial silt to reach the water table, some descending more than 15 meters. Their brick linings prevent collapse and contamination from surface runoff. At the summit of Mohenjo-daro's western mound stands the structure known as the Great Bath, a rectangular tank measuring 12 meters north to south, 7 meters east to west, and nearly 2.5 meters deep. Its floor consists of finely fitted bricks set on edge, sealed with a thick layer of natural bitumen imported from distant sources, likely the Baluchistan highlands. A second layer of bricks encases the bitumen, creating a waterproof membrane of remarkable durability. The tank fills from a well in an adjacent room and drains through a corbelled outlet channel more than 1 meter high, large enough for a person to enter for maintenance. Surrounding the tank, a colonnade of brick pillars supports a roofed corridor. Small chambers line the eastern edge, each containing its own drain. The entire complex speaks of ritual purification, of water not merely as utility, but as sacred medium. 500 kilometers to the southeast, at Dolavira on Kadir Island in the Rann of Kutch, water management takes a different form dictated by an arid landscape. Here the city's engineers construct 16 reservoirs, carved from the living rock and reinforced with masonry walls, capturing seasonal monsoon runoff from 2 ephemeral streams that bracket the settlement. The largest reservoir stretches nearly 80 meters in length. Together they hold an estimated volume sufficient to sustain the city's population through the long, dry months between monsoons. Channels cut into bedrock direct rainwater from the fortification walls themselves into these storage basins. The city's own architecture becomes a catchment system. This is governance made material, not through decree or inscription, but through infrastructure that requires coordinated labor, technical expertise, long-term planning, and continuous maintenance. The gradient of a drain implies a surveyor. The uniformity of well construction implies standardized training. The reservoir system at Dolavira implies seasonal forecasting and resource allocation. The civilization's invisible authority writes its presence not in stone monuments, but in the movement of water, captured, channeled, purified, and shared. But the movement of water is only one expression of the organizing intelligence that pervades these cities. Another reveals itself in the workshops, in the heat of kilns, the patience of drilling, the transformation of raw stone into objects of astonishing precision. By 2,400 years before the Common Era, the mature Harappan world has produced something remarkable. Entire communities devoted not to farming, but to the making of things. Chanhudaro sits 130 kilometers south of Mohenjo-daro along the Indus, a modest settlement of perhaps 4,000 or 5,000 people. Yet its excavated layers reveal almost no agricultural infrastructure. Instead, the ground yields bead-making debris in extraordinary density, unfinished carnelian blanks, broken drill bits of ernestite, grinding stones worn smooth, and the fine dust of 1,000 hours of lapidary work. This is a craft town, a place where entire households specialize in transforming rough carnelian nodules from Gujarat into elongated beryl beads of deep translucent red. The process is extraordinary in its demands. Raw carnelian must first be heated in controlled fires, reaching temperatures above 350 degrees to deepen its color from pale orange to the blood red prized across the ancient world. The heated stone is then chipped into rough blanks, ground against sandstone to achieve the desired barrel or biconed shape, and finally drilled hona, a process requiring hours of patient rotation with a bow drill tipped with ernestite, a stone harder than carnelian itself. A single long barrel bead, some reaching 12 centimeters, may require 24 hours of continuous drilling. The finished product travels as far as the royal tombs of Ur in Mesopotamia, where Leonard Woolley recovered Harappan carnelian beads among the grave goods of the 26th century before the Common Era. Alongside the bead makers work the etchers, artisans who paint designs onto finished carnelian using an alkali paste, likely derived from plant ash mixed with natron. When heated, the alkali bleaches the carnelian surface white in precise geometric patterns. These etched beads appear nowhere else in the ancient world during this period. They are uniquely Harappan, signatures of a craft tradition so specialized that its chemical knowledge implies generations of accumulated expertise. At Nageshwar and Balakot along the coast, different hands work different materials. The Turbinella pyrum shell, harvested from the Arabian Sea, arrives in bulk. Workers saw the thick columella, the shell's central column, into bangles, ladles, and inlay pieces using bronze saws and abrasive sand. The debris is immense. Tons of shell waste accumulate in midden deposits meters deep. These are not household crafts performed in spare hours. They represent full-time, year-round industrial production. The seal carvers occupy perhaps the highest tier of craft specialization. Working in steatite, a soft stone that hardens when fired, they incise animal figures and script signs in mirror image using copper berrins no wider than a millimeter. The unicorn bull, the elephant, the rhinoceros, the short-horned buffalo emerge in miniature with anatomical accuracy that implies close observation of living animals. After carving, the seals are fired in kilns at temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees, transforming soft steatite into a hard white surface that takes clean impressions in clay. The raw materials for these crafts travel vast distances. Lapis lazuli arrives from the mines of Badakhshan in northeastern Afghanistan, crossing 700 kilometers of mountain terrain. Tin, essential for bronze production, comes from sources in Afghanistan or possibly beyond. Gold travels northward from alluvial deposits in Karnataka over 1,500 kilometers to the south. Copper arrives from the Aravalli hills of Rajasthan and from Oman across the sea. The procurement networks are continental in scale. Faience workshops produce thousands of small objects, bangles, beads, tiny animal figurines, from a paste of crushed quartz, alkite, and colorant fired to produce a glassy blue-green surface. Kilns at Mohenjo-daro and Harappa show repeated firings at controlled temperatures, their walls vitrified from sustained heat. Nearby, evidence of cotton textile production appears in the form of cloth impressions on clay and corroded metal, the earliest confirmed woven cotton in human history. fibers spun fine and woven tight enough to wrap copper tools for transport. Each workshop, each craft quarter, each kiln represents knowledge held in human hands and passed between generations without any written manual we can read. And yet these workshops do not produce for their cities alone. The goods that emerge from Harappan kilns and lapidary benches travel distances that dwarf the already vast territory of the civilization itself. By 2,300 years before the Common Era, a commercial network of extraordinary reach connects the Indus cities to the Persian Gulf, the Tigris-Euphrates Delta, the highlands of Afghanistan, and the coasts of Oman, a web of exchange that operates across open ocean, through mountain passes, and along river systems spanning thousands of kilometers. At Lothal, on the Gulf of Khambhat in present-day Gujarat, the evidence of this maritime ambition takes physical form. A trapezoidal basin, roughly 217 meters long and 37 meters wide, lined with fired bricks and connected to an ancient channel of the Sabarmati River, sits at the eastern edge of the settlement. Its walls still stand to a height of over 4 meters in places. An inlet channel and a spillway suggest a system designed to manage tidal flows, to allow vessels entry at high water and maintain depth within the basin during low tide. Whether this structure served as a formal dockyard or a water reservoir remains debated, but its association with a warehouse containing sealed goods, numerous Harappan seals, and evidence of bead and copper working points toward a settlement organized around the movement of cargo. The goods flow outward. In the royal cemetery of Ur, dating to approximately 2,600 to 2,300 years before the Common Era, archaeologists recovered long barrel-shaped carnelian beads, etched with white alkali patterns identical to those produced at Mohenjo-daro and other Harappan workshops. Cuneiform tablets from Akkadian and Ur III period Mesopotamia reference a distant land called Meluha, a source of carnelian, lapis lazuli, timber, ivory, exotic birds, and copper. The descriptions match no known region more closely than the Indus Valley and its resource networks. Harappan seals have been found at Ur, at Tel Asma, at Kish, and at Susa in Elam. Round Persian Gulf seals, a hybrid form blending Harappan and Mesopotamian elements, appear at Bahrain's Qala'at al-Bahrain and at Failaka Island in Kuwait, marking the intermediate stations of Dilmun, the great entrepôt of Gulf trade. The island of Bahrain itself yields Harappan-style weights, cubical chert stones calibrated to the standard unit of approximately 13.7 grams, with binary multiples ascending through a system of 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64 Dave, a precision that facilitated exchange across linguistic and cultural boundaries without shared script. Overland, the routes are equally ambitious. At Shortugai, on the Amu Darya in northern Afghanistan, over 1,000 kilometers from the nearest major Harappan city, a small settlement yields unmistakably Harappan material: Indus-style pottery, a seal bearing the unicorn bull motif, and evidence of lapis lazuli processing. This outpost sits near the mines of Badakhshan, the ancient world's primary source of the deep blue stone, prized from Egypt to Mesopotamia. The Harappan presence here represents a direct procurement strategy, securing raw material at its source. Through the Bolan Pass, caravans move between the highland communities of Baluchistan and the lowland cities. Through the Gomal Pass farther north, Roots connect to the lapis and tin sources of Central Asia. Along the Makran coast, small settlements, Sutkagandor, Sotkako, appear to serve as way stations for coastal shipping, their Harappan material culture unmistakable despite their remote positions near the modern Iranian border. The system operates without coinage, without any currency we can identify. Seals pressed into clay bullae secure bundles and containers. Standardized weights verify quantities. The entire apparatus of long-distance commerce functions through material trust, the seal impression guaranteeing origin, the weight standard guaranteeing measure, the quality of the bead or the metal guaranteeing value. It is trade administered not by royal decree inscribed on palace walls, but by a shared material grammar legible across the Western Sea and beyond. But the shared material grammar of trade, the seals, the weights, the standardized measures, points toward something deeper. Beyond commerce, beyond hydraulic engineering, beyond the grid of streets and the gradient of drains, there exists a system of signs that no modern mind has yet unlocked. Across more than 4,000 inscribed objects recovered from sites spanning the full geographic range of the civilization, a script appears, brief, consistent, and utterly silent. The typical inscription runs fewer than 5 signs. The longest known example, a signboard excavated at Dholavira in Gujarat's Rann of Kutch, bears 10 large signs carved from white crystalline material and originally inlaid into a wooden board above the northern gate of the citadel. Each glyph measures approximately 37 centimeters in height, monumental in scale, public in intent, yet impenetrable in meaning. The board fell face down when its wooden frame decayed, preserving the arrangement in the earth for over 4,000 years. Scholars have identified approximately 417 distinct signs in the corpus. This number sits uncomfortably between the 20 to 40 characters of an alphabet and the several hundred signs of a purely logographic system like early Sumerian. The count suggests a logosyllabic script, one combining word signs with phonetic elements, though this remains hypothesis. The direction of writing runs predominantly from right to left, evidenced by the cramping of final signs at the left margin of seal faces and by the wider spacing that opens each line on the right. The seals themselves are predominantly square, carved from steatite softened by heating, then hardened again through firing at temperatures above 1,000 degrees. The most common motif, appearing on perhaps 60% of all recovered seals, depicts the so-called unicorn bull, a composite animal shown in profile with a single horn, standing before a ritual object, variously interpreted as an incense burner, a manger, or a sacred standard. Other animals appear with less frequency but striking specificity. The Indian elephant, the water buffalo, the short-horned bull, the rhinoceros, the tiger. Each animal type correlates with particular sign sequences, suggesting that the motifs and script function together as a unified communicative system, perhaps marking institutional identity, clan affiliation, or ritual authority. Among the figurative art, certain pieces carry extraordinary weight. A small steatite bust from Mohenjo-daro, barely 17 centimeters tall, depicts a bearded figure wearing a trefoil-patterned cloak draped over the left shoulder. The eyes are narrow, half-closed, the expression inward. Excavators named it the Priest King, though nothing confirms either priesthood or kingship. A bronze figure, 10.5 centimeters in height, portrays a young woman standing in a posture of confident ease, one hand on her hip, her left arm stacked with bangles from shoulder to wrist. She wears nothing else. Her identity, dancer, ritual figure, portrait, remains unknown. Then there is seal number 420 from Mohenjo-daro, a figure seated in a cross-legged posture on a low platform, wearing an elaborate horned headdress, surrounded by animals: elephant, tiger, rhinoceros, buffalo. The posture suggests meditation or yogic discipline. Some scholars have identified this as a proto-form of the later Hindu deity Shiva, in his aspect as Pashupati, Lord of Animals. Others caution against reading later religious traditions backward across 2 millennia of cultural transformation. Terracotta figurines, thousands recovered across the civilization, depict women adorned with elaborate headdresses, wide hips, and applied jewelry. Whether these represent a mother goddess, fertility symbols, votive offerings, or simple toys remains debated. No temple structure has been definitively identified. No altar bears inscriptions naming a deity. The religious life of these cities, if religious it was, left its traces only in portable objects and ambiguous imagery. Decipherment attempts have continued since the 1920s. Claims have linked the script to Dravidian languages, to early Indo-Aryan, to Sumerian, to language isolates. None has achieved scholarly consensus. The inscriptions are too short. There is no bilingual text, no Rosetta Stone linking Indus signs to a known language. The script may encode names, titles, or brief formulae rather than continuous prose. It may never yield its secrets fully. What remains is the material fact, a civilization of millions that committed its deepest meanings to signs we cannot read, leaving behind only the eloquent precision of its objects and the mute geometry of its cities. But the mute geometry speaks in other registers, beyond the undeciphered script, beyond the seals and their enigmatic signs. The cities themselves record the texture of ordinary existence, in the thickness of walls, the wear on grinding stones, the toys left in courtyards, the bones of the dead arranged with quiet care beneath house floors and in cemetery plots at the settlement margins. A household in Mohenjo-daro occupies a courtyard house of fired brick. The rooms open inward, away from the street. Windows, where they exist, face the interior court rather than the public lane. Privacy is architectural principle. The courtyard catches light and air, channels rainwater toward a central drain, and serves as the primary workspace for food preparation. Grinding stones of sandstone, saddle querns worn smooth by decades of use, sit against courtyard walls. Wheat and barley constitute the dietary foundation. Charred grain recovered from storage jars and floor deposits confirms this across dozens of sites. At Lothal, in coastal Gujarat, rice husks appear embedded in clay and pottery, evidence of cultivation at the civilization's southeastern margins by approximately 2300 before the Common Era. Sesame, dates, field peas, and lentils supplement the cereal base. Cattle bones dominate faunal assemblages, followed by sheep, goat, water buffalo, and fish. The diet is varied, adequate, and remarkably consistent across social strata as revealed by isotopic analysis of skeletal remains. The dead tell their own stories. At Harappa's cemetery R37, bodies lie in extended supposition within rectangular pits, oriented roughly north-south. Grave goods accompany them: pottery vessels, shell bangles, copper mirrors, carnelian and agate beads, but never in quantities suggesting extreme wealth disparity. No burial at any Harappan site contains gold in abundance. No chamber tomb rivals those of Ur or Egypt's elite. The differentiation exists but remains modest. At Rakhigarhi, ancient DNA extracted in 2019 from a female burial dated to approximately 2300 before the Common Era revealed ancestry consistent with the local population of the Iranian Plateau and South Asian hunter-gatherers, with no detectable steppe-related admixture, confirming that the civilization's builders were indigenous to the region's deep demographic history. Skeletal pathology reveals a population relatively free of interpersonal violence. Healed fractures appear at rates comparable to accidental injury rather than warfare. Dental caries rates remain low, consistent with a grain-based diet not yet dominated by refined sugars. Tuberculosis and leprosy leave traces on some bones. Childhood mortality, as everywhere in the ancient world, is significant. Infant burials in ceramic urns beneath house floors occur at Harappa, Kalibangan, and Lothal. Children inhabit these cities visibly. Terracotta toys appear in extraordinary variety. Miniature carts with functional wheels, small animals on pull strings, whistles shaped like birds, rattles containing clay pellets. Game pieces of carved stone and ivory suggest board games. A terracotta monkey descending a string, found at Mohenjo-daro, demonstrates a mechanical toy of surprising sophistication. These objects cluster in residential contexts, in courtyards and rooms adjacent to cooking areas. Clothing leaves almost no direct trace, but cotton textile impressions survive on corroded metal objects and on the interior of ceramic vessels. A fragment adhering to a silver vase at Mohenjo-daro preserves a plain weave of remarkable fineness. The civilization produced the world's earliest known woven cotton. Terracotta figurines suggest elaborate hairstyles, necklaces of multiple strands, and waistbands. Shell bangles, manufactured in vast quantities at coastal workshops, appear on female skeletal wrists in burials, sometimes stacked from wrist to elbow. The houses themselves encode social structure. At Mohenjo-daro, house sizes range from single-room dwellings of roughly 25 square meters to sprawling compounds exceeding 350 square meters with dozens of rooms, multiple courtyards, private wells, and dedicated bathing platforms. Yet even the smallest houses connect to the city's drainage system. The gradient of wealth exists without producing architectural monuments to individual power. No house becomes a palace. No burial becomes a royal tomb. The social order, whatever its nature, distributes its material comforts along a spectrum rather than concentrating them at a visible apex, a pattern unique among the world's first urban civilizations. And then the rivers change. Sometime after 2000 before the Common Era, the system that sustained 5 centuries of urban life begins to falter, not through catastrophe, but through a slow withdrawal of the very waters that made the civilization possible. The evidence lies not in ancient texts, for none survive that can be read, but in the earth itself. Satellite imagery of the Ghaggar-Hakra basin in modern Rajasthan and Cholistan reveals paleochannels, ghost rivers visible as dark traces beneath sand and scrub, their ancient beds still detectable by remote sensing, decades after geologists first mapped them from the air. These channels once carried monsoon-fed waters across what is now the eastern Thar desert margin, sustaining over 300 known Harappan settlements along their banks. By 1900 before the Common Era, the evidence suggests that major tributaries feeding this system had shifted course through avulsion, the geological process by which a river abandons its channel for a new path across the floodplain. The Sutlej, which Paleochannel evidence indicates once flowed westward into the Gaga-Hakra system, appears to have migrated eastward toward its present course, joining the bays. The Yamuna may have shifted east as well, drawn toward the Gangetic drainage. The result was not instantaneous drought, but a progressive reduction in perennial flow, transforming a reliable river system into one dependent solely on increasingly erratic monsoon rainfall. Settlements that thrived along these banks, Kalibangan, Banawali, Rakagari's hinterland communities, faced seasons of diminishing water where once the current ran year-round. At Mohenjo-daro, the crisis takes a different form. The city sits on the Indus floodplain in Sindh, and its stratigraphy records repeated inundation. Excavations reveal thick deposits of alluvial silt between occupation layers in the upper levels, evidence that the city flooded, was rebuilt, flooded again. The infrastructure that once defined its order begins to deteriorate in these final phases. Drains clog and go unrepaired. Houses are subdivided, their courtyards partitioned into smaller units. Kilns and hearths appear in spaces previously kept clear, industrial activity encroaching into residential and possibly ceremonial areas. The Great Bath itself shows signs of diminished maintenance in its latest phases. The long-distance trade networks that connected Harappan ports to Dilmun, Magan, and Mesopotamia contract sharply. Cuneiform texts from Ur and other Mesopotamian cities reference Meluha. The land scholars identify with the Indus civilization, with decreasing frequency after 2000 before the Common Era. By 1800, the references effectively cease. The carnelian beads, the etched steatite, the ivory and timber that once flowed westward through the Persian Gulf diminish to a trickle. Without these networks, the specialized craft production that defined cities like Mohenjo-daro loses its economic rationale. The famous skeletons found scattered in the upper levels of Mohenjo-daro, once interpreted by early excavators as evidence of a final massacre, perhaps by invading Aryans, have been reanalyzed by later scholars. They date to different periods, deposited across the city's final centuries rather than in a single violent event. Some show healed injuries from earlier in life. Their scattered positions suggest not organized slaughter, but the breakdown of formal burial practices, bodies left in abandoned streets and houses by a population too diminished or disorganized to maintain its funerary customs. The weakening of the Indian summer monsoon itself, documented through oxygen isotope records in Arabian Sea sediment cores and speleothem data from Oman, correlates with this period. A gradual aridification beginning around 2100 before the Common Era reduced rainfall across the entire region. For a civilization whose agriculture depended on monsoon flooding and winter rains to grow wheat and barley, even modest reductions in precipitation could push marginal settlements past the threshold of viability. The great cities do not fall to armies. They empty slowly, their populations dispersing toward regions where water remains, eastward toward the Ganges, Yamuna, Doab, southward into Gujarat, where smaller settlements persist with recognizably Harappan material culture, but without the urban scale or organizational complexity that once defined the civilization at its height. The abandonment is not a single event, but a slow exhalation lasting generations. By 1900 before the Common Era, Mohenjo-daro's upper levels tell a story of contraction. Houses once maintained with precision show-patched walls, rooms subdivided with crude partitions, kilns built inside formerly residential spaces. The great drains that once carried wastewater beneath every lane lie clogged with silt and refuse. No one repairs them. The civic authority, whatever form it took, has either dissolved or withdrawn its attention from infrastructure that defined this place for half a millennium. In the highest excavated strata, skeletal remains lie scattered in lanes and abandoned rooms, not formally buried, but left where they fell. For decades, these were interpreted as evidence of massacre, of invading armies. More careful analysis reveals they date to different periods within the final occupation, suggesting not a single catastrophe, but the slow unraveling of a community no longer capable of caring for its dead, according to older custom. At Harappa, 400 kilometers to the north, the transition takes a different form. The city does not simply decay, it transforms. In the area designated Cemetery H by excavators, a new burial tradition emerges above the older, mature Harappan levels. The dead are now cremated, their bones collected into large, painted urns decorated with peacocks, stars, peepal leaves, and antelopes. The pottery style differs markedly from the geometric precision of earlier Harappan wares. These vessels carry a looser, more expressive aesthetic. Naturalistic animals rendered with fluid brushstrokes, celestial motifs that suggest new cosmological ideas. The Cemetery H culture, dating from roughly 1900 to 1400 before the Common Era, represents not foreign conquest, but cultural evolution within a population that retains certain Harappan traits while adopting new ritual practices. Southward in Sindh, the Juka phase emerges in settlements like Chanhu-daro and Amri. Here too the material culture shifts. New stamp seal forms replace the older square steatite seals. Pottery styles change, but the underlying settlement patterns and certain craft techniques persist. The Juka people use the same sites, the same building materials, even some of the same tool forms. They are not invaders occupying ruins. They are descendants adapting. In Gujarat, the dispersal creates a constellation of smaller settlements. Rangpur, Rojdi, Prabhas, Patan, these late Harappan sites maintain recognizable ceramic traditions and continue using the cubical chert weights that once standardized commerce across 1,000 kilometers. But the settlements are modest. No grid-planned streets, no covered drains. The organizational complexity that required centralized planning has vanished, replaced by village-scale communities that remember certain technologies while forgetting, or no longer needing, the systems that once coordinated them. The eastward movement is perhaps most significant for later South Asian history. Populations shift toward the upper Ganges Yamuna Doab, where sites like Hulas and Alamgirpur show late Harappan pottery alongside newer traditions. The painted grey ware culture that will eventually emerge in this region carries no direct Harappan lineage in its ceramics, yet the agricultural knowledge, wheat, barley, rice, cotton, and certain craft skills persist in the substrate. The Harappan weight standard of approximately 13.7 grams continues in some communities well into the first millennium before the Common Era. What disappears is the urban idea itself, the notion that tens of thousands might live together in planned proximity, sharing infrastructure, submitting to standardized systems of measurement and waste management. This idea will not return to the subcontinent for over 1,000 years, until the rise of the Mahajanapadas and the Mauryan state. The people survive. The culture transforms. The bricks of Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, abandoned to wind and silt, will be scavenged by railway contractors in the 19th century of the Common Era, their 4,000-year-old fabric laid beneath the tracks of the Lahore-Multan line before anyone understands what they represent. The silence of the great cities does not mean the silence of everything they carried. Across the centuries that follow abandonment, the subcontinent transforms. New languages arrive. New ritual systems crystallize. Iron replaces bronze as the metal of daily life. Yet certain threads persist with a tenacity that suggests they have woven themselves into the deepest fabric of South Asian existence. By 1300 before the Common Era, the painted grey-ware culture spreads across the upper Ganges Yamuna Doab, its settlements small and agrarian, its pottery wheel-turned and painted with simple geometric patterns. These communities cultivate rice and wheat using techniques whose origins trace to Harappan-era agricultural knowledge. Cotton, first domesticated in the Indus Basin by the 6th millennium before the Common Era, remains in continuous cultivation. Sesame, another Harappan crop, persists as a staple oilseed. The agricultural substrate of the vanished civilization feeds populations that have no memory of its cities. The weight standards tell a quieter story. At sites in Gujarat and Rajasthan, cubical chert weights conforming to the old binary decimal ratios appear in contexts dating centuries after the urban collapse. Merchants in the emerging painted grey ware and later northern black polished ware settlements use measurement systems whose mathematical logic descends from Harappan precision. The unit of approximately 13.7 grams, or fractions and multiples thereof, surfaces in early historic trade contexts as though the memory of standardization outlived the institutions that first imposed it. In the realm of craft, the continuities are visible to the trained eye. Bead makers in Gujarat, at Khambhat and surrounding villages, still practice micro-drilling techniques on carnelian and agate using methods whose essential principles have not changed in 4,000 years. The long barrel-shaped carnelian beads that Harappan artisans exported to Mesopotamia find echoes in the ornamental traditions of later Indian jewelry. Shell-working communities along the Gujarat and Sindh coasts continue to produce bangles from the same species of marine shell, Turbinella pyrum, that Harappan craftspeople harvested. The iconographic echoes provoke deeper questions. A steatite seal from Mohenjo-daro depicts a seated figure in a cross-legged posture, surrounded by animals: an elephant, a tiger, a rhinoceros, a buffalo, with what appears to be a horned headdress. When John Marshall published this image in 1931, he identified it as a prototype of the Hindu deity Shiva in the aspect of Pashupati, Lord of Animals. The identification remains debated, yet the posture, the animal association, the possible ithyphallic element, these motifs reappear in later Indian religious art with a consistency that resists dismissal as coincidence. The pipal tree, sacred in Harappan iconography as evidenced by multiple seals, becomes the Bodhi tree of Buddhist tradition and remains sacred in Hindu practice. Ritual bathing, so architecturally emphasized at Mohenjo-daro's Great Bath, becomes central to Hindu purification rites. By the 6th century before the Common Era, the Mahajanapadas, the great realms of the Ganges plain, begin constructing fortified cities. Taxila in the northwest and Rajgir in Bihar adopt planned street layouts. By the 4th century before the Common Era, Pataliputra under the Mauryan dynasty achieves a scale and administrative sophistication that recalls, however distantly, the organizational capacity of the Harappan world. Its timber palisaded walls enclose a grid of streets. Its drainage, while different in material, serves the same civic function. The urban idea, dormant for over a millennium, returns, not as direct inheritance, but as convergent necessity, shaped perhaps by cultural memory encoded in practice rather than text. The linguistic substrate offers another trace. Dravidian languages, spoken today across southern India, contain agricultural and craft terminology that some linguists argue predates Indo-Aryan arrival. Words for plough, rice, certain weaving techniques, these may descend from the language or languages spoken in Harappan cities, though without decipherment of the script, this remains hypothesis rather than proof. The Munda language family too contributes substrate vocabulary related to agriculture and metallurgy. What endures is not a dynasty or a doctrine, but a way of inhabiting the world, the primacy of water management, the sanctity of certain trees and animals, the geometry of civic space, the patient skill of the bead-maker's hand turning stone into light. For nearly 4,000 years, the bricks lie buried beneath alluvial silt and wind-blown sand, their precise ratios forgotten, their drains choked with earth, their streets walked only by farmers and herdsmen who know nothing of what sleeps beneath their fields. In 1826, a deserter from the East India Company's army named Charles Masson wanders through the Punjab and notes a vast mound near the village of Harappa, describing what he believes to be a ruined castle of great antiquity. He sketches the crumbling ramparts without understanding their age. The bricks are already being carried away. Local contractors mine the ancient mound for ballast, feeding Harappan fired brick into the roadbed of the Lahore to Multan railway line in the 1850s. Thousands of years of urban history crushed beneath iron rails. Alexander Cunningham, the first Director General of the Archaeological Survey of India, visits Harappa in 1872 and 1873. He recovers a strange seal, a humped bull carved in intaglio on a small stone tablet, surrounded by characters in an unknown script. He publishes it, notes its oddity, but assigns the site no great antiquity. The seal enters the collection of the British Museum, where it waits. The true reckoning begins in 1920. Dayaram Sahni commences systematic excavation at Harappa under the direction of John Marshall, then Director General of the Archaeological Survey. 2 years later, 600 kilometers to the south in Sindh, Rakhal Das Banerjee begins digging at a mound called Mohenjo-daro, the Mound of the Dead. What emerges from both sites simultaneously defies expectation. These are not Buddhist ruins, not Mauryan remains. They are older, far older, belonging to a civilization entirely unknown to history. In September 1924, Marshall publishes his announcement in the Illustrated London News, declaring the discovery of a pre-Aryan civilization in the Indus Valley, dating to the 3rd millennium before the Common Era. The antiquity of South Asian urban life doubles overnight. Excavations intensify through the 1920s and 30s. Ernest Mackay works at Mohenjo-daro and Chanhu-daro. Madhusarup Vats continues at Harappa. The Great Bath emerges from the earth. its bitumen waterproofing still intact after 4 millennia. The dancing girl bronze appears, 8 centimeters of lost wax casting that rewrites assumptions about ancient metallurgical skill. Steatite seals accumulate by the hundreds, each bearing that maddening, beautiful, undeciphered script. Partition in 1947 splits the archaeological heritage between 2 new nations. Mohenjo-daro and Chandhu-daro fall within Pakistan, Harappa likewise. India retains Lothal, Kalibangan, Dholavira, Rakhigarhi. The civilization itself, indifferent to modern borders, sprawls across both countries and into Afghanistan. Decades of further survey reveal the staggering scale. Over 1,500 sites are now identified. In 2019, ancient DNA extracted from a female burial at Rakhigarhi, dating to approximately 2600 before the Common Era, reveals genetic ancestry consistent with the indigenous South Asian population, with no detectable step-related admixture, confirming that the civilization's builders were local peoples whose descendants still inhabit the subcontinent. In 2021, Dholavira receives UNESCO World Heritage status. Its rock-cut reservoirs and monumental gateways finally granted global recognition. The script remains undeciphered. Over 400 distinct signs have been catalogued across more than 4,000 inscribed objects. Computational analyses, pattern matching algorithms, and comparative linguistic studies continue. The average inscription contains fewer than 5 signs, perhaps too brief for any definitive decipherment without a bilingual key. The civilization keeps its deepest counsel. What is known grows with every season of fieldwork. Ground-penetrating radar revealing buried walls, isotopic analysis of teeth mapping individual migration, archaeobotanical flotation recovering ancient seeds. The mounds still hold more than has been unearthed. Mohenjo-daro remains largely unexcavated below its water table. Rakhigarhi, possibly the largest Harappan site, has barely been sampled. The story is not finished. It is still being read from the earth, one careful trowel stroke at a time, 5 million lives slowly returning from silence into the light of understanding. Thank you for joining this journey through one of humanity's most remarkable and mysterious civilizations. If these stories of the ancient world resonate, please subscribe to the channel so you never miss what comes next.